is Indian Country Today.
Esquili, yes, thank you for joining us. I'm Patty Tholahungva. 3 Native women candidates are headed to the general election in November. All 3 are Democrats and are vying for offices in North Dakota's state legislature. Thomasina Mandan, who is Mandan Hidatsa and Arikara, and Tracy Wilkie from the Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa are both running for state house seats. For the state senate, Lisa Finley DeVille ran unopposed. She's from the Mandan Hidatsa and Arikara Nation. Wilkie said, quote, "Knowing that there are 2 other Native women besides myself who are using their voices to bring change is very empowering." All 3 will face incumbents in November. In 2018, Ruth Buffalo, also from the Mandan Hidatsa and Arikara Nation, was the only Native woman seeking a seat in the North Dakota legislature. She won and became the first Native woman and Native Democrat to serve in the North Dakota legislature. As protests continue across the country, statues of Confederate soldiers are being toppled and taken down, and now a statue of Christopher Columbus is removed by protesters. Last night in Richmond, Virginia, the statue was torn down, set on fire, and then tossed in a lake. Activists spoke about the shared struggles Indigenous people and African Americans share. After 2 hours of chanting for the statue to be taken down, protesters did just that, as police helicopters circled the area. Earlier this week, Black Lives Matter organizers in Iowa tweeted they will no longer use the chant, "Whose streets? Our streets." Instead, they're doing a land acknowledgement of the Indigenous people who once called the area home, and they include the Bajau, Sauk, and Meskwaki people. And while the protests are raising the issue of police brutality against African Americans and Indigenous people, police brutality is not just happening in the US. In Canada, Nunavut leaders are calling for a territory-wide review of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police after dozens of cases emerged there. According to the CBC, more than 30 cases involving police brutality, misconduct, and insensitivity were filed. Many of the allegations come from Inuit women who complained about the responses to domestic violence and sexual assault calls. They also say they were mistreated while in custody and were subjected to degrading strip searches. The women also say they experienced racism and cultural insensitivity at the hands of police. Members of the Legislative Assembly have joined the Nunavut group, which is an organization that represents the people, the Inuit people there, along with the Legal Services Board, in calling for a thorough review of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police in the territory. And now for the latest numbers of COVID-19 positive tests in Indian Country, let's go to our Washington editor, Jordan Bennett-Bigay. Jordan?
Patty, we're really getting a better look at the COVID-19 impact in Indian Country each day. Today, 7 tribes announced more COVID-19 cases and deaths. 1 new case appeared in Alaska at a tribal health center, and 2 Nebraska tribes are seeing an increase in a growing number of cases within their communities. And here are the latest numbers from our database. There are 9,223 positive confirmed cases and 365 deaths in the Indian health system. Again, that is a total of 9,223 positive confirmed cases and 365 deaths as of June 10th. The Norton Sound Health Corporation in Nome, Alaska reported their 4th case of COVID-19. The last case appeared at the health center two weeks ago. In Mississippi, the Mississippi Band of Choctaw Indians have 5 new cases and 2 additional deaths. That brings their total to 745 cases for the tribe and 43 deaths in total. The Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians in North Carolina reported a total of 43 cases, and this is an increase of 37 cases in our database. The Navajo Nation, that spans across Arizona, New Mexico, and parts of Utah, are reporting 40 new cases and 8 additional deaths. In Arizona, the White Mountain Apache tribe announced 53 new cases. They have a total of 1,056 cases and 12 deaths. In Oklahoma, the Cherokee Nation reported 1 additional case. The Winnebago tribe in Nebraska now has a total of 55 cases and 1 death. This is an increase of cases of 13. And next to them, the Omaha tribe has a total of 61 cases right now.
All right, Jordan Bennett-Bigay, thank you so much.
ahead.
And we'll be right back.
This is Indian Country Today.
Welcome back. The death of George Floyd while in the custody of the Minneapolis police has sparked nationwide protests against police brutality and the treatment of African Americans and other people of color by police across the country. One Native group that took a vocal stand against the police is the Metropolitan Urban Indian Directors Group. MUD, as they're known, is made up of 30 American Indian organizations in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area. In a letter condemning the killing of Floyd, they also called attention to the mistreatment of American Indians and Alaska Natives there. Robert Lilligren joins us today, and he's the president of MUD. Welcome, Robert.
Yeah, bonjour, Ndinui Meganaduk. Hello, my relatives. Thanks for having me today, Patty.
Well, we appreciate you being here. Now, the letter that your group sent, it outlined the long history of police violence against Native Americans. Give us a few examples that you named in your letter.
Yeah, well, there was a really famous example of police transporting a Native man in the trunk of their squad car that caused quite a bit of community concern. I served for 12 years on the Minneapolis City Council, and during my time there was a case where police officers actually urinated on a Native person, and that caused quite a bit of uproar and protest as well.
Oh my, and the case of transporting that Native person happened back in 1992. And then most recently, there were some cases involving the officer, Chauvin, who is, of course, now being charged with the death of George Floyd.
Right, former Officer Chauvin was involved in the death of a Native man here as well.
And can you tell us a little bit more about that?
I don't have a lot of details, Patty, and my apologies. It is referenced within the letter. I know that he was retained on the force. He was not fired. I don't believe there was even any discipline that happened around that case.
All right. So, we're going back, a couple of decades. And before that, who knows what may have happened, but they were looking at this history of mistreatment by the Minneapolis police when it comes to Native Americans here. Now, so today, your letter you've sent out to the mayor and to, of course, the police there, one of the things you're asking for is the removal of the head of the police union.
Mm-hmm. Right. His name is Bob Kroll. He is famous here for his racist statements, his hostility toward people of color, his hostility sort of to the whole city of Minneapolis. And just before this interview, Taddy, I was monitoring a press conference by our police chief, Arredondo here, who has halted current contract negotiations with the union until it can be reframed in a more community-friendly way, and I was kind of surprised. The union, we identified at the MUD level the union as one of the tools that really hold the racist and violent and abusive culture in place here in the city of Minneapolis Police Department. And I was surprised how quickly others identified that as well, and that has become a hue and cry here. Concerns about the Minneapolis Police Federation and specifically its president, Bob Kroll.
And what is Kroll saying?
He is standing his ground. He is not moderating his position at all. If anything, he's more aggressive about the way policing should happen here in Minneapolis. He's defending the officers that were involved in the death of George Floyd. He has vowed to defend them through the entire process.
So really digging in and saying that they're not the problem?
Correct.
Or not part of the problem?
That's it, exactly.
Now you actually, Minneapolis had a Native woman who is the police chief chief of police there, and I believe her name is Jenna Hart.
Correct,
She was
Janae.
forced to resign in 2017. Can you talk a little bit about that and how she worked with the Native community there?
Yeah, I was really proud to be able to vote for Jenna Hart from the City Council for her appointment when she was first appointed. She did a very thorough job of engaging communities that traditionally have experienced abuse from the police. She was very engaged with the Native community here. There were some incidences that happened during her term in office that caused her to lose the confidence of the mayor, which made it difficult for her to do her position. And so she did resign from her position. But while she was here, I think she was the first woman police chief here, the first Native police chief, and she was also Two-Spirit. So she was really a representative of a lot of communities that traditionally do not feel well served by the police here.
And how did she work with the union at that time? Do you recall, any kind of interaction that, again, when we're talking about police brutality, how did she work with the union?
There's always that tension between union and management. Minneapolis is a very strong union city, very strong union community. We respect and hold up most of the work of our unions. And so while I was in City Hall and in elected office, I was part of the management, and there's always that tension. You expect it. I would say when the union leadership changed, the former president, represented his membership well. There was that dynamic, that tension between management and the union, but it wasn't as aggressive and it wasn't as blatantly dismissive of any kind of oversight. And so like all police chiefs in Minneapolis, she struggled is the right word, but she had to ride that dynamic and that tension between management and the force. And I will say within Minneapolis police, the upper ranks generally tend to be more open to community policing, more open to better policing within communities of color and indigenous communities. But when you get down into the rank and file, that kind of breaks down a little more.
All right. Now, also overnight, apparently there is an investigation going on now because another Minneapolis police officer posted on Facebook and basically targeted a Somali neighborhood and said, hey, looters and rioters, you missed one area. So, and that person actually was posted in his police uniform. So they're doing an internal investigation. Do you have faith in these internal investigations?
So there are a lot of investigations happening around the Minneapolis police right now. Our state human rights commissioner filed a complaint, and there's a human rights complaint, a civil rights complaint around the treatment of Minneapolis police officers. So that there's an investigation there. There's an FBI investigation going on around the murder of George Floyd. I think we have more confidence in these outside investigations rather than internal investigations. There were a lot of concerns for our East African communities during the most aggressive nights of protesting and riots and looting. A lot of statements directing people there. There was a lot of concern about our Native community here as well, and the community here was incredible. The way American Indian Movement, AIM, the people of Little Earth of United Tribes, which is a very densely populated housing development here. People stepped forward to protect our communities, but there was always this concern that because it was an identified Native area or an identified Somali area or Latinx area, that those were being targeted.
So a number of investigations, as you put it. Wow. Now, your letter was pretty straightforward, and you wrote in there that if the police department didn't understand the problem they had, they were either inept or too inept to detect the sick individuals, as you wrote, before they were given free rein to commit atrocious acts of murder. And you were talking directly about Officer Chauvin. So now you have the State Attorney General weighing in on this, Mr. Keith Ellison. Are you happy with his response to date?
It's hard to be happy with anything kind of going on here right now, but I'm satisfied that our Attorney General, that Keith Ellison, is stepping in, that he's interceding. He started his political career as a state representative in North Minneapolis, which is our identified African American part of the city, and so he's been involved. He was an attorney before that, and so he's been involved in issues of misconduct of police for a long time in his career. I have more confidence in his ability to prosecute this case than, say, the county attorney. There was quite a bit of objection to our county attorney, who would have normally been the jurisdiction to investigate here. And so we're glad that Attorney General Keith Ellison took over the case.
And have, as MUD, as a collective group representing Native American organizations, have you met with the mayor? Have you met with the Attorney General? Have you met with any of the other players in this case?
So because of the pandemic, it's hard to actually meet face to face. We're in conversation with the mayor, in conversation with the governor. Of course, we have a Native Lieutenant Governor here in Peggy Flanagan. MUD is often consulted, plays an advisory role for the public sector and in Native issues. We have been engaged with, there was a wonderful thing that happened the first night of the National Guard here. So that was a week ago Saturday, when we were able to engage directly with the mayor in the mayor's office, directly with the governor in the governor's office, to explain that people in the Native community were out as protectors and not protesters. And so the local law enforcement, the National Guard, had an understanding there, and that we were able to develop sort of a rapport so that it was clear people weren't violating curfew, we were protecting our assets.
And again, Minneapolis has a large Native American population due to the relocation policy, by the federal government, close proximity to tribes in the area there. And so you're very involved, and it has a huge history, even with Native businesses along Franklin Avenue and around the 3rd Precinct area, which is where Officer Chauvin was based. So can you talk a little bit about that and give a little bit of more of a context of how entrenched in the community Native people are, and not just from local tribes, but from people across the country?
Correct, Patty. There is a very dense Native community, densely populated. We have some of the highest, if not the highest, concentration of Native population in the country. We have census tracts that are almost completely Native, and a lot of that comes out of the activism that you're talking about. The American Indian movement was founded here in 1968. There's just a culture here in general in Minneapolis and in Minnesota where people who live here are expected to step forward, kind of engage in the civic life. And the same happened with the Indian community, the urban Indian community. AIM helped establish a lot of anchor institutions. So we have this density of population, this density of institutions, of businesses that clearly identify a sector of our city as Native. Franklin Avenue is kind of the corridor. We call it the American Indian Cultural Corridor. Back in the day, they called it the Avenue, but it's been identified with the Native community for over half a century, and kind of what we claim as ours. And Franklin Avenue runs parallel to Lake Street, East Lake Street, where the 3rd Precinct is, which was kind of the epicenter of a lot of the demonstrations, a lot of the violence as well. And it's about 10 blocks closer to downtown than Lake Street, Franklin is. And so we have a clearly defined territory and a cluster of assets. And when people come to the city as Native people, they get it right away, and that this is Indian country. We have a lot of placemaking we've been working on. Again, the idea of American Indian Cultural Corridor as a destination. And so we had an
your community just celebrated the renaming of Lake Calhoun to Bade-Makaska.
Correct. And there's been families that have stepped forward, the Bean family in particular, Dakota family, who are descended from Cloud Man, who have been really advancing the sort of reclaim and rename movement. Bade-Makaska was a huge victory for the community. The former name, Calhoun, was named after a slaveholder, and and not really aligned with values here. And there was some heartburn, and it went all the way to the state Supreme Court, and it's been settled. It's B'dai now, and there's a real elevation, I will say, at the kind of public awareness here, especially ever since the 2018 large homeless encampment that was right in the middle of the American Indian Cultural Corridor, brought a lot of awareness to the issues that contribute to the challenges in our community. And so you're seeing a much more robust integration of Native perspectives being put forward in a lot of planning, a lot of conversations here in Minneapolis. And so it's kind of leveraging the next generation from those activists that founded AIM, that established these anchor institutions, and this real sense of place here.
It seems like a contradiction because there is so much Native involvement. There's, all these organizations there. You've got Peggy Flanagan as your lieutenant governor, and yet you still have this huge issue with the police. And, and obviously it's an issue across the country.
Right, and Patty, it's not just the police. This is kind of a phenomenon here in Minnesota and in Minneapolis especially, where we have this long history, we have this sense of being very progressive and open and welcoming, but as data, more and more data is available, we have some of the largest disparities by pretty much every social indicator right here in Minneapolis, larger than just about anywhere in the country. And so this is giving us an opportunity to kind of open that conversation a little more and say, yeah, okay, we have these great attitudes, we have this great history, but we're not making progress. So what do we really need to do to address the deeply ingrained racism in our institutions, in our culture? And I think the death of George Floyd has given us another way to step off and have more authentic and hopefully effective conversations.
Well, again, it certainly has raised issues all across the country when it comes to police treatment of people of color. So here, what is the next step you want to see happen? And in this, looking at the police in Minneapolis?
So our city council, it's a 13-member city council. 9 of our council members made an announcement last weekend that they want to dismantle and defund the police here. And so it's to put a process together. What does that look like? What does community policing look like? How can we authentically change our police model? How can we shift the institutions like the Minneapolis Police Federation, the union, so that we're supporting community policing? Another irony here is we have a long history of public sector, city invested community policing models that just never have been able to take sort of root in the culture because of the oppressive culture of the police department. And so it's to have those authentic conversations, bring the voices of those who are most impacted by police misconduct and police brutality into the policy making realm. It's something that we can do here. And so now we need to be engaging people, engaging the Native community. As you pointed out, we have the infrastructure to really get those voices of the people most impacted right into the decision-making process.
We interviewed Kevin Alice, who is the head of the National Congress of American Indians. He's also a former police officer with the Baltimore PD, and he talked about demilitarizing the police, to not have them trained in those tactics, because the mindset is so different. When you're trained in military, you're trained to go to war, but when you're trained with the police as a police officer, you're to protect and serve the public. So what are your thoughts on the militarization of the police?
I agree that demilitarization is vital. I witnessed the militarization of the police here firsthand post 9/11. There was just a huge effort at the federal government to get these military type tactics, equipment, training into the local policing, and it does impact the relationship. There is no real direct relationship between someone in riot gear and the person they're trying to protect. Our mayor here is committed to the demilitarization of the police, to stopping what he calls warrior tactics within the police department. And I think that emphasis on community policing and on relationships between law enforcement and the people they're there to protect and serve is vital. Not increased investment in military tactics.
All right. And can you give us a brief update on Migizi Communications? You know, of course, they fell victim to fires set around them and their building burned. We also spoke with a contractor who works with Migizi. How are they doing now?
You know, the community has just rallied. They were so close to the 3rd precinct. That was the only building on that block that was not vandalized. It just happened to burn because all the other buildings were burned. AIM and our other protectors protected the building. The community is rallying. I'm sure it'll come back stronger and better than it was, but it was destroyed. A lot of archival stuff was saved from the fire, but we're rallying around Migizi for sure.
Okay. Well, we want to thank you, Robert Lilligren, the president of the Metropolitan Urban Indian Directors Group in Minneapolis. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, Miigwech, thanks for having me here.
All right, and thank you for watching. Take care of yourselves. Your life is precious. I'm Patty Tholahungva. Thanks for joining us.
This is Indian Country Today.